The Baggies podcast, giving you the latest news, views and opinions on all things Albion. Now available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Hello Baggies fans and welcome to another episode of the Baggies podcast. It's episode 37 here today. It's a bit of a different one. The normal format, if you're new to the podcast, basically you have to listen to me for a little bit, then you listen to somebody more interesting and me together. But this week it's different because you don't have to listen to me at all at the start. There's no listen, well, apart from now because I'm just explaining to you what's happening. But there's no listening to me at the start. Basically, the whole episode is an interview with a very special guest. It's just a nice conversation between two Albion fans. This particular Albion fan is ITV News Political Correspondent and presenter Daniel Hewitt, and he's joined me to talk all things Albion and all his memories from Albion and, you know, all that sort of jazz, and also a bit on this season, unfortunately, as well. But yes, it's definitely a must-listen-to episode. So if you're listening to me now, don't stop, or don't, if you have to stop, if you need to put the bins out or something, just do that, and then come back, because this is one you won't want to miss. If you're new around here, make sure your Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube is all followed, subscribed, downloaded, all that stuff. But yeah, thank you for downloading the episode if you have already. And make sure you're leaving us a nice review if you're enjoying the podcast. Make sure you're following us on Twitter as well, at the Baggies Pod or at @LouisBent_, or you can follow Daniel on Twitter. His link will be in the description. But yes, here is a nice little chat with Daniel Hewitt from ITV News and a huge West Brom fan. Let's go. As mentioned in the introduction to the podcast, I am joined by a very special guest this week. I'm joined by Daniel Hewitt, who's a political correspondent and presenter for ITV News, and he's also a West Bromwich Albion fan. That's why he's here. Daniel, how are you? Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm good, mate. How are you? You all right?
I'm all right, yes. So you are a political correspondent. Now, some people may not know what that means, including perhaps
Yeah.
But so what exactly do you do all day?
Well, each day is different, but basically my job is to cover politics for ITV. So I'm based in Westminster, though I travel quite a lot around the country. Probably one of the few people who hasn't actually been in lockdown at any point, really. I've been traveling around the whole time. So my job is to report on politics and sort of current affairs for ITV, sort of all through the week, really. So every day can be different. Some weeks I'm doing the daily. You may have seen me doing the daily press conference with Boris Johnson and some of the ministers. Do that sometimes. Sometimes, reporting from the Houses of Parliament. In ordinary times before COVID, my life was Brexit for a long time, so that was fun.
Okay.
I know. So it's been Brexit and COVID the last 4 years, so it's been pretty fun. But no, it's pretty full on. It's a pretty full on job. And I'd like to say that the Albion are a sort of nice relief, but not at the moment. But yeah, so that's my job, yeah. And I do a couple of podcasts as well, which is I'm more than happy to come on to this podcast because I think it's great.
Yeah, well, you say about Albion not particularly giving you the sweet release from perhaps your day job, but if we take a look back at perhaps greener pastures of your previous memories. So you were born. My research tells me that you were born in Cannock, which is obviously West Bromwich, and you're a West Bromwich Albion fan, of course. So how did you get into supporting them? How did it come about?
Yeah, my dad's a big Albion fan, as is his brother, as is all my cousins. We're a big Albion family, really. My dad was 11. If you can hear barking, that's my dog, by the way. So I apologise if you can hear that. But my dad started supporting Albion as an 11-year-old on the day we won the FA Cup in '68. And he the road he used to live on in Pelsall in Walsall. The bottom of the road was that there was a bus, and the bus used to pass the ground. So from 11, he used to go to the ground and became a fan pretty much the day of the FA Cup final. So he's always grown up supporting the Albion. He used to go home and away with his mate, and then his younger brother started going along with him. So him and my uncle have been going for years, and I started going. It wasn't really a choice, I have to say. I mean, it's not yet a legal form of child abuse making your son support a shit football team. But if it is, then my dad's in trouble, I think. But so my first game was 5, and it was 1993. I can barely remember it, but we lost 1-0 at home to Bristol City, and we lost 1-0, and it was awful. And I sat in what was the Rainbow Stand, which is now the East Stand. And I hated it. And there's a sort of I watched my younger cousins come up, sort of your age and a little bit older, And I've sort of watched them come up over the years. And there's a point where you're just too young. And my dad tried to take me too young, I think. Like 4 or 5, obviously it was cold. And look, we were crap. It was like bottom end of Division 1 back then. And sorry, is that really frustrating? A dog, sorry. And we were just crap. And it was cold. I remember the game being rubbish, and I just wanted to go after like half an hour. After the pie and the Coke, I really wanted to go home. And I think I left it another year, and then he took me again. And my mum was dead. My mum was dead against me going again because I really not liked the first time. And that second time it just clicked, and that was it. Never stopped going since then, since I was 6, really. So I had the same seat in the Brummie Road and until about 4 or 5 years ago, JJ 161 for 20 something years.
Yeah.
And that's how it started, really. My dad took me. So yeah, we were properly crap then. I mean, that's So the season I started supporting Albion, we'd just come up from this. I'd missed the glory sort of season of the playoff final against Port Vale. I missed that. So we'd just come up. I think Keith Birkinshaw was manager, and we were just awful, like really, really bad. Like that. I know how old you are, but that I've got my cousins are sort of their first seasons were like the first year of the Premier League.
Yeah.
Sort of early 2000s. So since the early 2000s, we've been pretty good, relatively speaking, for the size of the club. And we've always been involved in something. I was chatting to someone the other day, I was saying, the thing about sporting West Brom is it's never, ever boring. We've been involved in a relegation or a promotion battle pretty much for the last 20 years. There's not many clubs have been in that position. Where in the 90s, we were just dross, absolute dross, and sort of just falling down the chat then Division 1. So that was my sort of start, really. But I loved it. Loved every second of it. Couldn't go to enough games, yeah.
Yeah, trust me, I know how it feels being thrust straight into the West Brom sort of fan base without consent, really.
No consent, exactly.
Yeah. That Baggy bird thing was the first thing I saw when I was born. The first thing, my granddad just said, "Here's his toy. He's going to be an Albion fan." And I was like, "Right, okay then. Yeah, we're doing this."
And it's like an aggressively scary mascot, because I was mascot when I was about 9 against Reading at home, and I remember meeting Baggy Bird, and I was petrified. He was massive.
Yeah, the wings,
absolutely huge. The wings are just huge. Like, I remember just meeting him, just looking up and being like tears, and like my mom like pulled me away from him. I was like, my sister was little, like really young, but much younger than me. She kind of came along with the family to watch me be the mascot for the day, and she just couldn't stop crying. He's like a terrible mascot, like for a kid. It was designed for children. It's a really bad mascot. But yeah, no choice. Like you, mate, no choice to be an Albion fan.
The wing, like I remember, I'm one of the first times I met him. The wing just sort of it like flaps over at the end, and it sort of just covered my face. And it honestly, it scarred me for life.
Doesn't surprise me.
But yeah, you mentioned obviously watching the Albion in that early 90s. I think that was after speaking to Richard Sneaks a couple of weeks ago. It was quite. He described it as like it was so good because he sort of came in, and that was sort of the catalyst for things getting a bit better. But if you had to sort of pick in your early as your first West Bromwich Albion sort of hero, would you be able to do that?
Well, I can tell a funny story about that actually. But before, I mean, Richard Sneakers was the turning point in for the club, really. He was the first. So I went to primary school in a little village called Heath Hayes near Cannock, and it was in the 90s. Villa were doing really well, and loads of my mates were Villa fans. It was half Villa, half Wolves. I'm the only Albion fan of my group of mates still to this day. And Villa were flying like in Europe and stuff, like York and all that. And Wolves were doing all right. In the 90s, unlike now, Wolves always beat us in the 90s. We had a terrible record, especially at Molineux. And Sneakers was like the first good player I'd seen in the flesh. Like Bob Taylor was a good player, but Bob Taylor was you sort of learn to appreciate Bob Taylor as an older, how sort of prolific he was. But in the 90s, when you're sort of a kid, and this is definitely, especially even more so now with like YouTube and Instagram, so you can access good footballers so easily. But even in the 90s, Bob Taylor was a sort of like poacher, whereas there was no kind of quality sort of sexy footballers in the 90s playing for Albion. And then Sneakers turned up. This he was gorgeous. He had like long blonde hair. He was like like foreign. I think he was the first foreign player I'd seen play for us. I mean, it was like he shouldn't play, and he was just brilliant. I remember him scoring a 30-yard goal on like a Tuesday night against someone, and I couldn't stop talking about it. The playground at primary school the next day. But no, my favourite. So he was like a hero of mine. And I distinctly remember an away. One of my favourite things about being an Albion fan is the last away game of the season, going dressed up as in a theme. And I remember my first one of that was the sneakers weeks. Everyone went in the long weeks. But yeah, so weirdly, so I remember the day I was mascot. It must have been the day I was mascot or something like that. I went into the dressing room to meet the players. I was only a kid, and the only good player was before sneakers. So it would have been before I was a mascot, and the only good player was Bob Taylor. It was the only good player we had. Andy Hunt was okay. Yeah. Lee Ashcroft and Kevin Donovan were okay. They were all slightly out of their depth in the Championship after having a good season in like the then League One or Division 2. And but for some reason I was obsessed with a winger called Dave Gilbert. I've no idea why. You probably don't know who this guy is.
Oh, I haven't got a clue.
But a winger. It was the Alan Buckley era, where Alan Buckley had basically got him from Grimsby, and he just bought all the Grimsby players, apart from the only good Grimsby player, who was Clive Mendonca, who he didn't sign. So he signed all this shit from Grimsby, except the only player we actually wanted, which was Clive Mendonca, who went to Charlton. And for some reason, I was obsessed with Dave Gilbert. He was this little sort of stocky winger. And he had like half a good season for us. And for some reason, as a kid, I was obsessed with him. So in the dressing room, I remember the woman came up to me and like there was a bunch of kids and said, "Who do you want to speak to?" And everyone said, "Bob Taylor, Bob Taylor, Bob Taylor, Super Bob, Bob, Bob." And I went, "Dave Gilbert." And the woman thought I was taking the piss, like a sort of, like an 8-year-old. No one else wanted to speak. I think even Dave Gilbert was pretty surprised. But for some reason, I just really liked Dave Gilbert. And there was a guy behind me in the Brummie Road end who, every time Gilbert picked the ball up, he'd shout, "Skin him, Gilly!" And I don't think Dave Gilbert ever skinned anyone. I don't think he ever got across it. But for some reason, I was obsessed with him. So Gilbert was sort of like my first Albion, like, hero is probably overstretching it. The player I remember liking. But sneakers, definitely. I mean, sneakers sort of changed everything, really. And then obviously after sneakers, it was sort of Megson. Gary Megson came in, and that's when it really started being really fun, supporting us.
Yeah, I think I can relate to that sort of a weird obsession with a player. I remember a few years ago, for me, it was, I think it was probably more because my dad didn't like him, and I was just sort of doing it to annoy him. But he didn't like Rondon. He didn't like Rondon a few years ago, and I was like, I love Rondon. He's like my favourite player. And actually, I ended up really liking him, and I followed him around at Newcastle to see what he was up to. But yeah, it's sort of that weird little obsession when, like, your friends go, "Who's your favourite player?" And it would probably be Brunty around that sort of time. You go, yeah, Brunty, of course, he's the best player in the team or something like that. And then I go, "Oh, Solomon Rondon, definitely." Yeah.
See, Rondon's a funny one for me because the Rondon era was sort of the Pulis era, and I was very unpopular, I think, amongst a lot of Twitter Albion fans because forgive me if this is like heresy because it is for some West Brom fans. I didn't mind Pulis. But I wasn't a huge fan of Rondon. Rondon was okay. I mean, in hindsight, he was much better than the lot we've got now. But I was that was probably my peak, like, Pulis defense on Twitter. I've backed off a lot from tweeting about Albion because I just can't be bothered with the hassle. It's just too much stick. But there was a lot of the thought that your dad will back me up on this. The thought at the time was that Rondon was not playing well, and you may agree with this point. Yeah. Rondon didn't play well because he had no service, and what he did well with what he had. I always thought that was not true. I always thought he was pretty rubbish, and he actually didn't hold the ball up nowhere near enough as he should have. And I would tweet every now and again just saying, like, I don't think Rondon played well or whatever. And then I discovered quite recently that he blocked me on Twitter.
No, Rondon.
Yeah. Rondon,
he was a nice guy. I didn't think that was the sort of person you could tick off.
Very thin-skinned by the sounds of it. I've never atted him. Like, I would never do that. I'm not like I on a very, very small level. I have a little bit of that in my job, and it's not nice. Like, you can disagree with someone or think they're rubbish, but don't pile on the mentions. Why would you do that? So I would just kind of comment on the way he played. Sometimes critically, but never rude. And anyway, someone had quote tweeted something. And it was deleted. I couldn't see it and I clicked on it, and it's Solomon Rondon has blocked you. So Solomon Rondon was at that time was tweeting his own name and looking through the tweets.
The search in your own name. I think I've seen that a few times where nobody's mentioned the player, like, with the at, but they've just obviously searched their own name. And I think somebody actually, that happened with somebody and Luke Dowling. I think Luke Dowling had a sort of little secret Twitter account going on, and this bloke tweeted him, and obviously he didn't like what he said about him, and he blocked him straight away. And he's like, I've never seen this account before. He's obviously been searching what people have been saying about him. Yeah, it's one of those strange ones. I didn't think I thought Rondon always came across a very smiley chap. I didn't think this was the sort of thing.
Well, I'm sure he is. It might be that he's just a bit sensitive, and I'm sure he listens to this podcast. So if you're listening, Solomon, I have no hard feelings. More than happy to have a chat about it. In hindsight, I was probably a bit too critical given the dross we have playing for us now. So I apologise if I offended you. Feel free to unblock me. If you don't want to unblock me, it's fine. I've got over it.
Well, Solomon, if you are listening, it'd be great to have you on.
More importantly, do you want to come on the Baggies podcast? Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure this isn't the sort of thing that you listen to now over in Russia. But Daniel, if I had to ask you to pick a best season supporting the club, obviously your first seasons will be quite high up in your memories of watching Albion. But if you had to pick a best season or best campaign or best sort of run of games even, what would you say?
It's a really easy question to answer. I think I've got the 2001-2, the first promotion season, when we chased Wolves down and went up at that. I mean, I remember I've got a freakishly good memory for that season. I mean, I'm not joking. I'm honestly being serious. When I even talk about, and I've got this now, when I talk about it, I get goosebumps on the back of my neck and I get a bit emotional. Like, that season was just incredible. Because you sort of have the context, as I mentioned earlier, up until that point, I'd only ever watched us be crap. We were never involved in the playoffs. We nearly got relegated on the last day, set up on the last day against Charlton. We had a sort of playoff run this next season, and never really thought we'd go up in the playoffs. They weren't good enough. I mean, we had players like Jason Van Blurk playing for us. I mean, you probably don't remember him. Just players like that. And yeah, he just came out of nowhere. We sort of had a decent start to the season, and then Wolves were running away with the league, and Man City were kind of just way too good for the league, and there was no one really thought it was going to happen. And suddenly we went on this incredible run and just kept winning, and Wolves just couldn't win a game. And it was that point where I was going every week, home and away. I think I probably missed 2 games that whole season, and it was every week we would go, and it was the 1-0 season. So it was the season where I think we won 1-0 like 18 times. And we kept 26 or 27 clean sheets. And it was just the most remarkable way to watch football. To the amount of games you go 1-0 up and just sit back. I remember we went to Coventry away. Wolves had lost in the early kickoff at home to Man City, and we could like cut the gap to like 3 points. And Bob Taylor scored after like a minute at Highfield Road, and we hung on for 90 minutes. And when I say hung on, we didn't eat under Megson. They didn't even try and get a second. It wasn't like, but they were just incredible defensively. Yeah, they were the fittest, most organised team, and it's a mixture for me of like that season's a Hollywood season for Albion fans. Not only did we kind of first promotion to the Premier League, but the fact that we did it against Wolves, and I have to say, I genuinely we could do a whole podcast on the Bradford away game. Like I would say I watched that on YouTube once a month. I'm not exaggerating. I could probably quote the commentary, like chunks of the commentary.
I think I actually saw a tweet about that earlier this week, and obviously I quite narrowly missed out being born before that fixture. But yeah,
you might.
And a lot of that season actually. But yeah, I saw it on Twitter, and I saw the table at some point during the season, and then I saw it at the end, and I was like, surely. I looked at the first picture, and I was like, surely you can't catch anybody from then. It looked a bit like what happened last season with Brentford, and how we just couldn't win a game, and they were up.
It was exactly that. It was exactly that. It was this absolute collapse. Wolves collapsed out of nowhere. And I remember so much about the weird little details. I remember in January we were going to sign a winger, I think, called Kevin Cooper from Cardiff. And at the last minute, he went to Wolves and he said something like, "They've got more chance of promotion." That was fucking great. I added loads to it. I remember they played like it was the time of ITV Digital. So like an ITV Digital, like they collapsed after about 3 seasons, but ITV had games again, and they had weird kickoff. It's sort of normal now to have a Friday or a Thursday, but they've introduced like Thursday night games or Friday night games. That never happened before. I remember going out to my cousin's house and we all piled in because my cousin's the only one who had ITV Digital, and we all watched it. And they lost at Millwall. I think Steve Clary, and they lost on a Friday night at Millwall, and then we won the next game. And I remember the Friday night away at Nottingham Forest. You should watch all this. Like Neil Clement free kick hits the bar, and Bob Taylor comes in and dive header, and like 5 minutes to go, and it was just a packed away end at Forest. And I remember the camera came across the away end, and everyone was saying, "Are you watching Wanderers?" at the camera. And it was just like it was this thing of we were chasing Wolves down, and they just couldn't. They couldn't. I think if they'd have won 2 games out of the last 11, they'd have gone promoted. They just couldn't win a game, and we just went on this ridiculous run that led to Bradford, where Bradford was the game where if we won, we went above them on the last day of the season. So he's in our own hands, and we couldn't score. We just threw everything at them. I remember their goalkeeper made this save off a Trevor Benjamin header. I to this day, people talk about the Gordon Banks Pele save. It's nothing compared to this save this keeper pulled out. And then I'm sure you've seen it. Ball comes across. Bob Taylor takes it on his left, cuts inside. Taylor takes him down. And then Igor Balis, who's if you ask my hero, if you ask my number one Albion hero, it is Igor Balis. Igor Balis, Slovakian, couldn't speak a word of English. Just slots it in the bottom corner, and it was just mayhem. And at that point, you realised how much of the Bradford stadium was just Albion fans. It was just Albion fans poured out every stand onto the pitch. I'd say of the 15,000 were there, 13,000 were Albion fans. Honestly, it was just. And then, we beat Palace on the last day, and that was it. So that season by a mile. I mean, I can name you the 11 of games in that season. They're just that was the Battle of Bramall Lane season as well.
Oh, yeah.
I was there for that. That was scary. The Battle of Bramall Lane was scary. It was when it went 3-0 and Michael Brown ran down the tunnel, injured, and we watched to the right, and the Sheffield United fan. We thought we were going home, basically. Third went in, and we thought they were going home. So they stand to the right side emptying. And then about 3 minutes later, all the police came in the away end. Loads of police came in the away end and shut all the doors, boom, 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 all across the old Bramall Lane. And and then like a second later, you just heard all the Sheffield United fans trying to get in the away end. And I was like about 13. And my dad hadn't come to that. My dad hadn't come. I was with my cousin, who was only about 20 at the time. And him and his girlfriend. So there's only 3 of us. And it was the first time I think I've been to a game without my dad for about 15 years or something, or 10 years, whatever it was. And it was really scary, leaving the ground, because everyone remembers the football game. I remember walking back to our car and thinking, if anyone knows, for an Albion fan, we're in trouble. It was horrible. There was police horses everywhere. It was fighting. It was horrible. As a kid, it was horrible. You don't really see that kind of thing these days, but it was quite common back then. Away games were pretty scary. But that season, sorry, I'm talking way too much, but that season for me, I can talk about that season all day. It's a really easy question for me to answer that one.
I did think the other day, I've got my West Brom calendar behind me, and they chose Battle of Bramall Lane for the March one of it, and I think obviously my dad, I think that's his number one thing to rage at, is the Battle of Bramall Lane. Thing to just think. I think that's one of the reasons why he doesn't like Neil Warnock to this day. But I thought it's a weird choice to have on the calendar. That is. I mean, I know it's a bit iconic considering that's probably
one
of the times it.
Yeah, and it was weird because I remember leaving the ground. It wasn't totally clear what was going to happen. I remember putting the radio on at 5 Live, and he was always talking about. I mean, to this day, I can't think of another game in my lifetime that's been abandoned for that reason. I'm probably sure there has been, but not at that level. And I remember people ringing up saying, "Well, on FIFA, if you get people sent off, then it's an automatic 3-0 win." And And
Yeah.
I'm not sure FIFA, and it was all that kind of thing. And we left the ground with like 20 minutes to go with the game, and the game ended with 20 minutes to go, and it wasn't totally clear what was going to happen. Like, would we be getting the 3 points? And at that point for us, the 3 points were huge. We were chasing Wolves down, so it wasn't totally clear. And Warnock kind of came out in his interview and said, "Well, I thought, look, we'll have to replay it." And it was just like Mason was furious.
Yeah.
And yeah, the whole thing. I listened to a podcast with Andy Johnson recently, who was one of my favourite players in that team. Yeah. And yeah, Santos, he knew in the week that Santos apparently wasn't. I mean, Santos wasn't basically playing for. He played for us the season before, or 2 seasons before, George Santos. And apparently he was like out of favour at Sheffield United. Wasn't going to like be kept on that season, and Warnock literally played him because he wanted to
because he had a
knock Andy Johnson.
rivalry with Andy Johnson.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was
I watched the Sky thing. I think it must have been like not a memorial, but like on this day sort of thing on Sky.
Yeah.
It was quite recently actually. I watched it again, and the commentators were like, "And here comes Santos. You know, he's got a history with Andy Johnson, and first touch of the ball, Johnson, bam."
First thing. I remember seeing him fly in the air, and at the time I knew. My dad used to work for Lucasade, so my dad used to call in on West Brom as part of his job, and he knew a few of the staff. He knew a guy called Nick Worth, who was the physio there, and Nick told us some stories about what happened after them, the tunnel, and Santos was trying to get in the dressing room to he wasn't finished. It was like it was serious. Santos wanted to kill him.
God.
It was pretty hard. And Danny Johnson's a nutcase. I mean, he's a pretty hard guy himself. But that season we just had everything. Had absolutely everything, and all the characters, and obviously that. It's why I'm sure we'll come on to it, but it's why I had such mixed feelings about the Darren Moore time when he was manager, because he was just an absolute hero of mine in that team. He was just a colossus at the back. He was just such an integral part of that team. I remember he had a knee injury before he came to Albion, and he used to have this routine before every game. He would hop on one foot 100 times, then hop on the other 100 times. I used to watch him from the Brimley Road and doing it. I used to love the guy. So when he became manager, it was like I just wanted him to succeed so much, because I just didn't want his legacy to be like ruined. Oh, there you go.
I actually think that's sort of a bit of a problem with a lot of modern players. Obviously, you've got Brunty now in the coaching staff, and you've got James Morrison, of course, potentially.
It keeps slipping for some reason. Sorry.
It's all right. Potentially, people saying, "Oh, give him the job," and whatnot. I think that's how you mentioned it there with Darren Moore. That's the reason why quite a few people don't want them to have the job, because if things go a bit pear-shaped, like perhaps they did with Big Dave, that's they don't want to see their hero be sort of booted out. They don't want to see them sacked. Yeah,
and also I've sort of, though I'm, as you can probably tell from this conversation, I'm a pretty sort of sentimental person. I look back on stuff with real, really happy memories. But I'm also kind of, I only care about Albion doing well now, and I don't care who our manager is unless as long as they do well. So if Darren Moore was that, I personally felt Moore probably was the right person for the job in that context, given what he'd done in that Premier League season towards the end. I think he'd earned the right. I think without Graham Jones, I think he'd have done a much better job. And I think that's shown at Doncaster. He's won. He's won today at Sheffield at Barnsley. So I don't really care. It's not my dream for Chris Brunt to be our manager. I mean, I feel like, I don't know about you, but I feel like every single time a manager gets sacked, we're linked with Michael Appleton, because he played for us like 20 years ago.
And Derek McInnes as well. Yeah,
Derek McInnes. Yeah, like I'm not desperate for them to come back, and I don't think because they played for us 20. I mean, in Michael Appleton's case, he barely played for us. 20 years ago. He was a really good player who had a horrible injury when he was at Albion. McInnes was the captain the year we got promoted. I mean, I love the guy to bits, but I don't really care that he played for us. I mean, never really quite understand that. I mean, Alex Ferguson had absolutely no connection with Man United, and Arsene Wenger had absolutely no connection with Arsenal when they went to those clubs.
Yeah,
they're just the best. So I just don't really care. So I think in the backroom stuff it can be slightly different. I think having someone around that gets the club and understands the club, and I think I don't know, maybe part of the win against Wolves was the fact that there was, I don't know, Morrison was around, and there was that kind of an Allardyce, that kind of manager who kind of get them up for those games, and that's probably maybe part of that. But yeah, on the whole, I'm not desperate for like the manager to always have a connection with the club. I think Gary Megson had no connection with Albion when he came in, and he's probably the most successful manager. And then Roy Hodgson same really. So yeah, it doesn't bother me really.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that one. I think it really doesn't matter who's in. They can build that connection with, they can, it's one of those things. Not every manager of every club's going to have 20 years playing experience at the club, are they? It's just one of those things where you can build that connection and build things up. But if unfortunately, I'm going to have to take you to present day, and we can talk about exactly what's been happening this season. So if you look back to the summer transfer window, that was perhaps where people think things went wrong, things went perhaps a bit pear-shaped. Obviously, the promotion was a bit wonky towards the end of the season last year, with obviously sort of stumbling over the line, eventually getting the job done. But where do you think sort of the mistakes lie this season? Obviously, it looks like Championship is all but there to be confirmed. But yeah, where do you stand with that?
So I sort of have it a sort of macro and micro view. My sort of micro view we'll go into in a second. The macro view is I don't think you can talk about this in any way without discussing the ownership of the club. Yeah. Like, I've got a real problem. I think any Albion fan with any sense, I have a real problem with how the club's been run. We're owned by a guy who doesn't care about us, doesn't want to own us anymore, doesn't even bother turning up, has no interest in football anymore because of the situation in China politically. He effectively been told to like get rid, but he can't. He can't sell the club for less than he bought it for because he can't lose face. He can't sell it until we're more profitable, but we're getting relegated partly because of the way he runs the club. It's like a kind of chicken and egg, like vicious circle. So yeah, I think any manager in that context is going to struggle. Clearly, Bilic didn't have enough money to spend. The money he did spend, I think you can. If you were being critical, you would say he spent too long trying to build last season's team. Yeah. Again, but then if you were being fair, I think that's a fair point. He got promoted on a team of loan players, and I mean, he kind of had to. He wasn't starting from scratch. He was starting 10 yards behind the start line because he had to basically spend all that money to get back to where we started. Kravinovic was a waste of a signing. I think Callum Robinson was a waste of a signing. I think he spent far too long trying to get Karlan Grant, given he's not been worth it. Ivanovic was a waste of a signing. He didn't spend enough time trying to bring in like a couple of quality defenders. We clearly needed a centre midfielder. So Conor Gallagher was a good signing, but I think he needed another one. I think it was quite clear from our last time the ball was not good enough at this level. So Bilic made mistakes. For sure, but given the money he had and given the time he had and given COVID, I think you'd be pretty harsh to say Bilic was kind of totally to blame. I think it's really difficult. And I think if you look what Sam Allardyce has done, I think the signing of Newcastle or wherever we're calling him has been like inspired. I mean, it's like seeing Jakob again. That kind of player we've really missed. Other than that, I'm not sure. Maitland-Niles has been okay. I mean, I know people like him, but he's missed some sitters. And the lad up front started okay, Diania. He started all right, but again, chances he's missed, which sort of shows how hard it is to buy a striker in the Premier League. I mean, we talked about Rondon earlier. I mean, but like in my time supporting Albion in the Premier League, we had a sort of glory era with Odemwingie and Shane Long, and for half the season Lukaku. Other than that, we've struggled. It's really, really hard to buy strikers at Premier League level, and the difference between teams that stay up and the teams that don't are a striker. Newcastle may squeak over the line because they've got Callum Wilson. And that's kind of that is the difference. So it's really hard, I think, to judge any manager given the situation of the ownership, and I think it's really hard to judge Bilic given how hard a task he had. I mean, on the question whether we should have sacked him or not, I think it's really difficult. I personally wouldn't have sacked him at all. I think it was really harsh. And you talked about stumbling over the line. I personally think he dragged that team over the line. I mean, if you look at the season before, I mean, Dwight Gale and Rodriguez scored like over 50 goals between them, and that team didn't get promoted. And our top scorer got 9 last season.
Yeah.
Right. Austin just stopped playing after the restart. He could barely move. Robson Canoe's always been a sort of 4 or 5 goal a season guy. It's a kind of miracle that team got promoted, given we basically weren't playing with a striker. Diangana was injured all season, apart from a kind of weird 3 months where we basically got promoted.
Yeah.
And again, that we spent a lot of money on Diangana, but I mean, was anyone saying at the time that was bad? That was money badly spent? I don't think they were. West Ham was saying that he was being sold to a relegation rival. So I think it's really tricky. I think hindsight's a wonderful thing. I think he didn't recruit well in the summer, but I'm not sure Allardyce has shown him how to recruit, given the fact we're basically we're a bit better than we were. We're a bit tighter at the back, but we're still getting relegated.
Yeah, I think.
What do you think?
I think the recruitment needs a bit of a look at, because I think if you're gonna give Bilic, you've got a nice playing style in Bilic. You're moving forwards as you were into the Premier League, and you're then sacking him after a couple of months in the Premier League. We're only 2 points away from the drop zone then, or getting out the drop zone at that point. So it wasn't completely doom and gloom. It wasn't nailed on at all. I mean, the squad, obviously, we looked at it and thought we ain't going to stay up with this sort of squad. Everybody thought that. But if you keep chopping and changing between the playing styles, you think about Pulis, and then you talk about trying to bring in more attractive styles of football, and you keep chopping and changing, and you keep bringing in and you keep feeding that manager's appetite for that style of football, and then keep tossing between the two, you're just going to end up with a mix of players like probably we do have now, which are just a mix of past and present. You've got people like Kieran Gibbs, who are still there from Pulis, obviously a quality left back in his day, but obviously getting older a bit now. But you've got these players in there that are flair players. You've got people like Diangana, Pereira, who I don't think Pulis would have had in his team in a million years. But then I wouldn't have thought Allardyce would have had Pereira in his team, to be honest. I thought that was the first person who's going to get sort of shipped out. I know Diangana's had some, issues with injury, not being in the team. But yeah, I think if you keep shifting between those sorts of, I think we need to just have a clear plan, basically. Like, I know it's probably not the way to do it, but Norwich and Brentford, maybe not Brentford, but Norwich, who go down, stick with their manager, and then come back up. I feel that's probably, I'd rather have that than just keep tossing and changing between managers.
I agree with you, and I think that sort of comes back to the ownership thing, right? I think any sensible owner that isn't, look, let's be frank. He sacked Bilic and bought Allardyce in because he only cares about staying up. Fair enough. Yeah. Why does he only care about staying up? So he can sell us. And more money in the Premier League. And so I think I can tell you're a pretty sensible guy. There's not many of them on Twitter, football fans. I think most Albion fans would probably resign to the fact we get relegated this season. It was a pretty big ask to stay up. If we'd have got relegated under Bilic, I don't think anyone would have been that upset. I mean, if you're going to get relegated in any season, make it the season where we can't watch any of the games. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. I kind of accepted that when the minute we got promoted, for me, the sort of relief of promotion, the celebration was a genuinely kind of a financial one of like, wow, okay, that's 3 or 4 more years of parachute payments. Because I think the minute we have to lean on our owner, he'll just go, and we're in trouble. Like we're sliding. And I think getting promoted for me was a sort of like a security blanket that we got given. Football wise, great. And I think you're right. I think we started to see a bit of identity under Bilic. The thing for me with Allardyce, the thing that got me and things I've been really disappointed with, and again I'll go back to it, like the reason why I was a fan of Pulis, and I genuinely was a fan of his, because I don't support Albion because I like them. Like I support Albion because I'm addicted to them. Like I'm addicted to the Albion. I can't help it. They're like a drug. I really sometimes wish I could kick it, but I can't. So I don't care how we play. I just want to win. And so I don't go to the Albion for entertainment. I go to like the cinema for that. So for me, when we win 1-0 and we had like 2 shots and it was crap to watch, I'm fine with that. Yeah. I never really quite understood why people were bothered about that. The problem is when you start losing, that's the problem. You start losing, it's like, well, it's dross and it's boring. I genuinely felt with Allardyce that he was better than Pulis. And I mean, I sort of half compared him in a tweet. I got a couple of responses saying, I think he's like better than Pulis. And I thought, you're probably right. I probably called that wrong. And the reason why I've been disappointed is because I genuinely thought he wasn't so sort of like uniform in his approach. I thought he would come in and say, right, what have I got to work with here? Like I watched from like afar at Everton and Palace and Sunderland where he'd gone in and he kept them up or he'd done well with them. And I felt from like the outside that he'd done that because he'd worked out, right, Defoe's my best player or Zaha's my best player. I'm going to build a team around them.
Yeah.
And I thought he'd come in and go, right, Pereira and Gallagher, they're my best players. Right, if I can just sort the defence out a bit, we'll build a team around these two. And all he did was basically make them defend all the time. And it was just like, and I just think, and I know nothing about football, but if your defenders are crap and ours are quite crap, don't make them do more defending.
Yeah.
They're quite bad at the defending they currently have to do. Don't make them do more. Try and get them doing less. Try and relieve the pressure a bit. And it just the game that really turned me against Allardyce was the Sheffield United game.
Yeah.
That game was totally there for the taking. We went 1-0 up completely against the run of play, and I thought, right, these are rubbish. We can if we counter and get a second, this game is over. And we're suddenly in this. We're suddenly like they're down, we're in, and second half we just came out and he just sat back. I was watching it thinking, are we gonna sit back against these and not try and get out? They're no good.
Yeah.
And we can't defend for 45. We've proven that in every game this season. We can't do that. So why are we trying? And I think for me, that was the moment where I realised Allardyce was a pretty unimaginative manager who I think's probably past it. And I just think football's moved on, and I think you can't make young footballers who've grown up on Instagram and YouTube. You can't make they're foreign players like Pereira. You can't make them want to defend for 90 minutes. They're not going to do it. They're not interested in doing it. It's not why they became footballers. And it used to work, but it doesn't work anymore. And I think, can you name a single team in the last 5-6 years that stayed up in the Premier League playing like that? It stops. No, people don't stay up like that anymore. It doesn't work like that anymore. And I think the game's moved on. And I think Bilic was kind of on the right track. Would have got relegated, I think, probably anyway. But I think we'd have got relegated like trying to play the way the players could play, rather than trying to make, like you said, trying to make people like Pereira play against their style. And it's just depressing. It's been depressing the last few weeks. I mean, it's slightly better against Burnley and Man United and stuff, but on the whole, pretty awful.
Yeah, I think you mentioned with Allardyce and his almost stubbornness to change. I think I remember I was actually going to bring up the Sheffield United game before you mentioned it. I thought, that's epitomised what he was trying to do. I think I spoke to a guy from The Athletic on the podcast a few weeks ago, and he coordinated a podcast series on Allardyce and his history. And one of the answers I asked him, will he adapt to the players he's got in front of him? Because these players are not defensive players. Well, the majority of them aren't. Most of them
no.
And he said, absolutely no way. He said, you will not see an inch of give with Allardyce. He said, you will just see what you've seen perhaps at Crystal Palace, West Ham, Everton. You'll just see that. And if your players aren't up to it, he'll get rid of the players and bring in new ones. He said, there's no alternating between playing styles. There's no, this team actually might be able to play a bit of football here. So we'll do a bit of football. It'll be, your classic Sam Allardyce football, where whoever he's got or wherever he goes.
And that's what we've seen, right? And it's been like the last few games, they've finally stopped shipping goals. But it seemed to me like such a ridiculous approach. And history is going to get, I think, more and more unkind on this season with Allardyce, because if you look at that, we sort of wasted 12 games while he waited to bring his own players in. And so it was just we just wrote off the point. We wrote off the only period of the season where we would realistically try and stay in the relegation battle.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time he kind of got his stuff together and brought his players in, it was kind of too late. And I just thought, well, that's not, I could do that. I'm a moron, and I could do that. I could go in and go, right, we're playing like this. And they go, well, we can't really play like that. So we're playing like this and lose 12 games. And then when suddenly when my mates turn up and I can play the way I want to play, we start it's too late, isn't it? It don't matter now. it doesn't matter that you want to get a point at Burnley with 10 men. I mean, great. It's good that there's a bit of desire. I'm honestly of the opinion in the 20, how many years? God, 26, 7 years I've been supporting the Albion. I can count on one hand the amount of times I've watched a team not try. Like, honestly, players often they play badly, and I never hate that. Oh, the players don't care, not playing with any desire. I don't believe that. I think most players do their best, and sometimes they're not good enough, or they have a bad day. And so I don't buy this. So they've started to show desire now, and I think they've started. I think when they lost 5-0 to Leeds or whatever it was, and 4-0 to Arsenal, I just don't think they weren't trying. They just couldn't play. They just can't play like that. There's no point trying to make them play like that. And anyone can see watching those games, you could see they can't do that. You're trying to make them do stuff they can't do. And I know that your long-term or medium-term ambition is to drop these players and bring your own in. That's fine. Yeah. But don't keep with this ridiculous system that's not working. And I kind of feel like he got relegated before he even got going, really. And I thought he was better than that. And I've been surprised. I also don't know what you think. I don't want to read too much into it, but I just don't think he's that bothered. The throwing thing at Tottenham and the Palace game, he sort of doesn't. I don't know. Maybe it's unhard. Maybe he would deny that. Maybe, but I just think he doesn't that bothered, does he? I don't know.
Yeah. I think I saw on Twitter a lot of people that there was a picture. I don't know whether you saw it of Allardyce, but he had half his mask over his face, and he was in the dugout, and he was like, it's almost like that face. He was like, it looked like he was either falling asleep or asleep, and people were arguing toss over it in the comments. And I think I remember a few people saying Bilic's passion and desire essentially got him nowhere, and I don't think, as you mentioned there, his passion and desire sort of literally yanked us over the line for promotion.
Yeah, I agree.
I know that's way Allardyce he basically gets Sammy Lee to do all the jumping about for him and all the running around on the touchline, because maybe it's because Allardyce is a bit unfit and can't be bothered to do all that sort of stuff, or physically unable to do that. But it just feels like this is there's no, I know you say no affiliation with the club, but there's no he hasn't tried to build that relationship with the club. I mean, it's almost, I think actually bringing back to that chat I had with the Athletic guy, he said, you don't buy into Allardyce. No, he doesn't buy into you, you buy into him. So it's sort of you buy into him, you don't, he's not going to think, West Bromwich Albion, what do their club like? What does their club like? I'm going to go and get a chicken balti pie just to endear myself to the fans. It's sort of you're coming into him.
Yeah, he won't be wearing a Sneakers wig. or dressing up as a Viking for Thomas Guard. So I think it's the kind of the question's been happening at Tottenham, isn't it, right now, about is sort of Mourinho sort of past it, it's that kind of mercenary thing of you bring Allardyce in because you're in trouble, he'll come in, he'll do what he needs to do for 2 or 3 years to get you out of the mess you're in, and then he moves on, he takes his pay and he moves on. And that's what sort of Mourinho has become a little bit, but it stopped working. I feel like that's a little bit what's happening with us. It's sort of, it doesn't work anymore. And I think every manager, most managers have a sort of, I think it's strange it happened to us twice. I mean, you'll know, obviously the Pardew season, it just feels the same. It just feels like, I mean, God, let's not talk about that. But that whole sort of the desperation to stay in the Premier League for all the wrong reasons, and you sort of force you to bring in a manager who's living off a long past reputation that doesn't stand up to the test of contemporary performances and stuff. I just, because it feels to me like we're kind of living through this, where history's repeated itself a little bit with Allardyce. I personally, I've thought about this a lot. I personally wouldn't have him next season, but I think we have to be careful who we want, because I'm like you. I kind of would like us to see someone come in and commit for 2 or 3, 4 years. That's probably realistic, not realistic, but and on the positive, that this team should walk with the right manager. This team should walk the league next season. I mean, definitely. Callum Robinson, and Karlan Grant up front with Dean Garner and Pereira in midfield.
Ridiculous.
It's that's a ridiculous championship team. Yeah, it's the best championship team we've ever had, probably. I mean, Gale and Rodriguez were good. That whole team was good, but that team is basically a very good championship team.
Yeah.
And so the right manager will I think take us up. But for me, it wouldn't be Allardyce because I just don't think he's that bothered. But I think I'd go back to the first question you asked me about this section about like where they all go wrong. I think you can talk around. You're sort of like fiddling with on the peripheries of this conversation if you're not going to deal with the main problem, and the main problem is the way we're run and the ownership. And I think until that's sorted, we're kind of going to be having the same conversations. We're kind of going to be getting promoted. We're going to get relegated. And that's what's going to keep happening because there's not going to be any genuine investment. And I think we are the kind of club that it can go wrong quite quickly. I don't rule out in my lifetime us playing like the lower leagues because that's the kind of club we are. Like, we've enjoyed 20 years of this, but speak to people in the 80s and the 90s and it wasn't great. So it can go bad pretty quickly. I think the ownership stuff needs to be sorted out really fast, I think.
Yeah, I think that's probably the one thing. I think you just need those shackles sort of released and let go, and then you can sort of start to build that vision. You can start to build on, even if it's just a manager, and give them that money that they need. But if we look towards next season, and obviously you said you wouldn't fancy Big Sam, I personally wouldn't either, and I don't think he fancies it either. I think a lot of people are resigned, even if they are a big Big Sam fan, that they just wouldn't have him on at the club next season. Wouldn't want to. Obviously, there's that break clause, which is obviously going to mean that he can walk for nothing at the end of the season. Who would you bring in if you available or unavailable, but realistic? Obviously, who would you have in as your manager?
Great question. I don't know. I've sort of stopped years ago bothering with this stuff. I've never had like a sort of I really want X, but partly because the ones that I've liked, I wouldn't have picked. So I mean, I loved Megson. I never even heard of him when we got him. The ones I have heard of have been pretty rubbish on the whole, apart from Roy Hodgson. Yeah. Like Steve Clarke came from nowhere. Roy Hodgson came from nowhere. I mean, I remember when we sacked Di Matteo and it was like, what are we doing? And then Hodgson came in and stuff. So I don't really know. I mean, I wouldn't give you a name of someone I think I want to be the manager because that would be kind of disingenuous of me. I've heard Eddie Howe mentioned. I think Eddie Howe is a really good example of a sort of, I personally think, a sort of one club manager. I think Burnley did a terrible job. I went back. I was a sports reporter up in Manchester, and I covered his very short period at Burnley as manager, and he was the fans hated him. He was crap. So I did interview an unknown young player he bought from Bournemouth with him called Danny Ings. Who ended up doing right.
Not sure.
Ended up doing right.
Heard of him.
He might have done right for himself. But yeah, so I think Eddie Howe again also needs money. I mean, he absolutely wasted it at Bournemouth on. So I don't think for me, I think he's a good manager. And I think I go back to what I said before. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to take that team up next season. I think it's just kind of don't do anything stupid. One of my best mates is a Rangers fan, and he thinks Gerrard is the real deal. Would Gerrard be interested? Probably not. But maybe it's that. I think I've lived through this kind of era before at Albion where the club sort of may not want to spend loads of money next season on a manager. And so if they want to spend money, I think they've got some good choices. If they don't, it couldn't end up being anybody. I don't want Michael Appleton. I have this obsession with Michael Appleton. I just don't. What has he done in his recent? I don't get it. So no, not Michael Appleton. But yeah, what about you? Have you got a sort of favourite or someone you think would be good?
My first pick would be Chris Wilder, but
okay, yeah.
The only problem is if there shouldn't be a problem with our owners, by the way. But if you apparently, the past couple of seasons have proved, if you give him a bit of money, he might waste it. Like Brewster, perhaps a bit of McBurney in there as well. 40 million on the pair of them is not the best business for Premier League. So that shouldn't be a problem with our owners. I do think, they're not going to chuck 20 million at him probably ever. So, you've
also seeing the best in Ollie Burke is absolutely criminal, by the way.
Oh yeah.
I call him mate to Sheffield United fans. Like, what do you think of Ollie Burke? And I was like, well, he might turn out that he's like, we've all got it wrong.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty awful. I don't really understand why. But it's interesting on Wilder though, because he wouldn't need the money, would he? And that's the thing. I think that's the one. It's the season after that. It's how much are the owners thinking about next season? Right, let's get someone who's got a track record of getting us up, getting teams up. And I think Wilder is a really good shout. It's that next season. Are we end up in the same position where Wilder has a pre-season, doesn't particularly buy well, 5 games in, then won a game, sacked him, back again. And that's kind of why I'm reluctant to answer your questions. I slightly feel like it's irrelevant. I slightly feel like I think it will take a special kind of manager not to get this team promoted if there's such a talented squad in that level. And I'm not sure they'll be too scarred by this season, to be honest. Maybe because a lot of them haven't played. So I'm hoping that Robinson and Grant and like Dean Garner won't be sort of like they can kind of pick up where they left off in the Championship. But I think Wilder's a pretty good shout actually. But it's just how far you want to go with it. Is he a 4 or 5 year project man like you were talking about? Probably not. But I think under the current ownership, we're not going to have that with anyone. I just don't think there's anyone like that. I don't think they're going to think, well, for 5 years we'll appoint this guy, because they're not thinking like that, are they? They're thinking, how can we sell this club as fast as possible? Yeah. So tricky. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, I think whoever's got that job at the club at the moment of deciding who's going to take things forward has got to have that absolute tunnel vision where he's got the next, honestly, 4 or 5 seasons in mind. Because as we mentioned with Chris Wilder, you give him a season now, next season, he'll get you up probably, and without spending much money. But the next couple of seasons after that, once they give him 20 million, 25 million to spend, I think he'd probably just have to have a clever brain down his ear going, don't buy Ollie Burke or buy Ollie something like that.
Exactly, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think hopefully we can see a much more successful West Bromwich Albion next season at least, and then I guess we'll just see what happens after that. But Daniel, it's been a real pleasure having you on the Baggies podcast this week. I'm sure a lot of people have enjoyed reminiscing over the past, but also hearing your thoughts on what's going on at the moment. But it really has been a pleasure having you, mate.
Oh, it's been a pleasure being on, honestly. I could say I could do this all night talking about the Albion. And I didn't get to mention, of course, the greatest game was the Wolves away, 5-1 away. Were you there? Were you old enough?
I was actually in my living room downstairs. I didn't go live, but I remember it was the first time I saw my dad knee slide across the front room. I do have to say that's probably one of them things that I think I'll probably only ever see once in my life. But that was, honestly, it gives me that's one of them you mentioned, giving you goosebumps. That's one of them that does that to you.
The goal with the Keith Andrews goal was the goal where when I think it was the 4th, and you sort of realised, oh God, we're gonna. Because I'm always like, we can go 3-1 up, and I still think we won't win. I'm pretty cynical. I'm a pretty skeptical, negative fan. I'm the kind of fan that like, oh, watches like that. And that was the 4th was the goal where it was like, oh God, we're gonna beat them, and we're gonna beat them by loads. It is brilliant, and the atmosphere in that stadium was toxic. The fury at the McCarthy was amazing, and we were stirring it. And we started the McCarthy out, and it's just, oh God, it was amazing. So getting back to the coach, I'm talking about scary. That was scary. Getting back to those coaches. And I lived in Canada. I've not lived in Canada for a long time, but when I used to go, when we could go before COVID, I'd drive to my dad's in Canada, and then we go together. We have to drive past the base of the Wolves ground to get to the Albion ground. You can only go on the coaches, and so when we were just on the way back on those coaches, it was the best feeling ever. But the walk to the coach after beating them 5-1 was head down, keep your mouth shut. There wasn't much singing, I can tell you that. But I just could not do a podcast with you about the Albion without mentioning that.
So there it was. That was this week's episode of the Baggies podcast. A long one. It's another long one. I do have to say I might have to start apologising for the length of these episodes, but they're just so enticing at the moment. I'm thinking, can I make more long episodes? And then I'm thinking I need to make less long episodes because I'm going to, people are going to get bored. But I don't think you can get bored with that sort of thing. But yeah, thank you very much to Daniel for joining me on this week's episode. Hopefully we'll see him again on the Baggies podcast. Maybe he'll become a bit of a regular. But yeah, if you want to go and follow us on Twitter at the Baggies pod, at @LouisBent_, or at, I can't remember Daniel's at, but his link will be in the description if you want to go and follow him. But yeah, leave a like down below if you're on YouTube, a follow, a Spotify, Apple Podcast follow, a review on either platform will be just fine. But yes, thank you for downloading the episode. It really does help the podcast gain, a bit of a measure of how far that we've come. But yes, episode 37 of the Baggies podcast featuring Daniel Hewitt has now ended. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.